Do you feel you can keep the job you have or gain a job if you don't have one? Are you pleased with the ability of young people to buy a home, of the elderly to live their remaining years in happiness, of our youngsters to take pride in the world we have built for them? Are you convinced that we have earned the respect of the world and our allies? Let us resolve tonight that young Americans will always find a city of hope in a country that is free. And let us resolve they will say of our day and of our generation that we did keep faith with our God, that we did act worthy of ourselves, that we did protect and pass on lovingly that shining city on a hill.
Oh, wow. That's the latest line of attack from a group called Republican Voters Against Trump, one of the many GOP groups working actively to stop Donald Trump's reelection effort. This video blending former President Ronald Reagan's words from one of his best-known speeches with news footage, real footage of Donald Trump's America today, trying to make the case for how far the party has fallen, and I would add the country has fallen under Trump, asking, has your party left you? Another trend out there, Republican-leaning voters who held their noses for Trump in 2016 but won't this time. From today's New York Times, quote, an emerging group of voters who dislike both major party presidential nominees in 2016, but who are now so disillusioned with President Trump and sufficiently comfortable with Mr. Biden that they are increasingly willing to support the Democrat. Michael Steele, Steve Schmidt, Alexi McCammon, no three better people to have this conversation with. Steve Schmidt, start with you. Why are Republicans so on their game to try to make sure? Is it guilt? Is it our feeling that we were somehow complicit in bringing the party and the country to this place?
I think Republicans are part of a coalition that wants to turn Donald Trump out of office because he's the worst president in the history of the country. He's a profound threat to the security of the country. And we have absolutely zero chance. And by zero chance, I mean zero, Z-E-R-O, zero chance of moving past this with Donald Trump in that job. He is completely unfit for it. He is unfit mentally. He is unfit physically. He is unfit intellectually. He is a conspiracy theorist who has the blood of over 100,000 Americans on his hands because of the incompetence and the ineptitude in the response to the coronavirus. The leading math and science country in the world is the epicenter of this, and there's one reason, and that's presidential incompetence. Full stop. Secondly, when you look at the Russian bounties, when you look at his disloyalty and treachery towards the men and women that he's sworn to command as commander-in-chief, the men and women who come from every race and creed, every corner of the country. The American people should not tolerate this. He has assaulted our institutions. He has desecrated his office. He has assailed the constitutional order. He has weakened the checks and balances. He has been a force for illiberalism. We see the rescission of democracy all over the globe. We see his assaults on our allies and the weakening of the American position. And so 4 years in, we stand at a moment of abject American weakness and tragedy that can't end until he's gone. And that's why there's so many groups out there telling the truth on Donald Trump, trying to convince these Republican voters to say, you're fired.
Michael Steele, anything on your mind, but pick up this thread for me, too. I think on top of it, as Lindsey Graham once said, there is no more decent man than Joe Biden.
And that's the problem for Donald Trump. He ain't Hillary. And the way the country felt about Hillary Clinton is 180 degrees away from how they felt for how they feel for Joe Biden. They have concluded and are continuing to conclude, which is what is reflected in a lot of the polling. And as Steve and I will tell you, we're not, advocating national polling at this point because it's all over the map and it's not the most reliable thing at times. But there is a trend line that's emerging in the behavior of the population of voters out there, as you just reflected and as Steve spoke to, about where voters are moving, where Republican voters are moving, that center left, center right independent voter who may have stood with Donald Trump in 2016 is firmly and beginning to strongly move away from him. So this now becomes a political problem for the president, which is why you have the Mount Rushmore moments, why you have the sort of dark, authoritarian speeches that he's been giving to bring that base back to him. But he's losing a lot of ground, and that's the difficulty he has to face because Joe Biden is not the opponent that he had 4 years ago.
Alexi, I'm confounded by the conduct of Trump and his allies because their mission is just what Michael Steele and Steve described, to reassemble their coalition, which was barely adequate for him to win in 2016. But you don't to reassemble that coalition, you need pro-life women who care about judges. You need people who I don't even know where you find them at this point because the debasement of the office is in front of everybody's face. But you don't get the coalition back in place by attacking Tammy Duckworth, who Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump have been going after on Twitter and on Tucker Carlson's show for the last 2 days. You don't get them by standing in front of Mount Rushmore and calling peaceful protesters fascists. I mean, the language suggests that at least in some corner of his brain, even Trump knows it's a long shot this time.
I mean, Nicole, I feel like you and I have talked about this in the last few weeks alone, how President Trump's stance on some of these major issues really overtaking the country is increasingly at odds with how the public feels and how Americans at large feel. That's, to say with the protests, with the coronavirus and wearing masks, with everything that you just mentioned. And, we're seeing how this is affecting his reelection efforts. To your point, I think that the president is relying on an increasingly small base of, supporters who loved who he was in 2016 and continue to support him no matter what. But there are a lot of people who are viewing this, and I'm hearing this in focus groups, and we're seeing this in polling, similar to 2016 in that they kind of view this in a way as a choice between, some people say, the lesser of two evils, but they think that Joe Biden is the lesser of two evils, so to speak, not in the way that they saw Hillary Clinton in 2016. I think to Michael Steele's point, that can't be overstated enough. Joe Biden not being Hillary Clinton is a good thing for Joe Biden, and Donald Trump being who Donald Trump is has been a good thing for Joe Biden, who has otherwise been able to run a campaign in this weird new virtual reality exactly as he sees fit without being dragged into the campaign trail or dragged into these rhetorical arguments by President Trump. And I think that's what's really working for Biden and hurting President Trump. And we also see that, Nicole, in the way that President Trump is struggling to define Joe Biden. Crooked Hillary Clinton, corrupt Hillary Clinton was a really good way to label her because of the way that people had vilified her for decades. Joe Biden hasn't been a boogeyman of the right-wing machine for decades like Hillary Clinton has. So I think there are a lot of unique challenges inherent to who Joe Biden is as a person and as a candidate that Trump and his team are really struggling to figure out as they're facing an election in just a few months.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.